Hello. Today we continue our Sunday school lesson. We're in lesson 7, where we'll be looking at the disciples on the Emmaus Road. As always, we can only cover so much in this video, but as you print out the guide, there's lots of handy things to do, singing and crafts to help you along your way, and I want to encourage you to engage in those to add more engagement to the lesson. But as we look at the Emmaus Road, the Bible truth we want to see is that Jesus shows that he is alive. His resurrection appearances are critical for that we see that. Now, I want you to understand that we are talking about what we would call historical truth. Jesus is alive after he was dead. But the meaning behind that can only be a theological truth. What does it mean that Jesus is alive? Well, Jesus himself informs us of that. It means that he is God and that he has accomplished the victory that he said that he came to accomplish. And that's what we rejoice in. Not just that he's alive, but that his living means everything for us today. Because just as it says in Romans, where he goes, we will follow. And we will follow after him from death into life. And we praise Jesus for that. We want to understand that Jesus still comes to us today, and we can still see him today by faith in word and sacrament, truly present there but hidden in these wonderful gifts that he has given to us. Our sinful nature blinds us to the truth of who God is, and we can't see God simply on our own. We won't just stumble our way into him, but Jesus comes and he reveals himself to us. And again, the way he reveals himself through us is through his word, through baptism, and through the Lord's Supper. And baptism and the Lord's Supper together we call the sacraments, because these are physical objects that God has put his wonderful promise of forgiveness and life upon for us. To help us understand that, we will look at the story of Jesus meeting the two disciples on the Emmaus Road. This is from Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. That very day, being the day of Jesus' resurrection, two of them, the disciples, were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things which had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." And he said to them, "O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is towards evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in and stayed with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. In this, the Bible narrative for older children, certainly want to encourage you to use the one for younger children if that fits your situation. The same day as Jesus' resurrection, 2 men were so sad and upset they left Jerusalem. They didn't believe what they had heard from the women who had seen the open tomb. These men were not part of Jesus' 12 apostles. They were part of a larger group of disciples or believers. One was named Cleopas, but we don't know the name of the other. They walked along a road that passed through a village called Emmaus. As they walked along, they talked about all the things that had happened. Jesus came near and started walking along with them, but they did not recognize him. He asked them, "What are you talking about?" They stopped walking and looked at him with sad faces. Cleopas asked him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there?" Jesus answered, "What things?" The 2 started telling Jesus about himself. They said he was a prophet who was mighty in what he said and did. They told how the chief priests and rulers had handed him over to Pilate, and that he had been crucified. They talked about how they had thought Jesus was going to save Israel. Then they said, "Some women from our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they didn't find his body, they came back saying they had seen angels who said he was alive." Jesus said, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken." He told them the Messiah had to suffer like this first, and then enter his glory by rising from the dead. Then he went through the Old Testament and taught them what God had written about his suffering, death, and resurrection. By now, it was late in the day. The 2 disciples were stopping in Emmaus for the night, but Jesus acted like he was going to go farther. The 2 begged him to stay with them, so he went inside. They sat down for supper, and Jesus took bread, broke it, said a prayer of thanks, and handed it to them. Suddenly, they recognized Jesus, and then he vanished from their sight. They talked about the wonderful burning feeling they had felt inside when Jesus was walking and talking with them. They were so excited that they ran back to Jerusalem, found Jesus' disciples, and told them how Jesus had walked and talked with them along the road. We can't recognize Jesus properly except through word and sacrament. That is what this lesson is actually teaching us. Jesus was there with them and alive, but they didn't realize who he was. And then he told them about Scripture. He went to the Old Testament, which was the only Scripture they had then, of course. But the promises of God were there too. That this person would have to come along who would suffer, but who would also rise again. And it's so strange, isn't it? Jesus himself had told his disciples that he would have to suffer, die, and on the 3rd day rise. And they could recognize it was the 3rd day, but they just couldn't imagine that Jesus was alive, even though the women had told them the message of the angel that it was true. In the Word, they begin to understand these truths. But it takes even a little bit more for them, doesn't it, for them to truly recognize who Jesus is and to properly rejoice in him. They invite him for a meal, but this is no ordinary supper. Jesus takes the bread, breaks and blesses it. This is the language of the Lord's Supper. And so we see that in the Word and in the Lord's Supper, we recognize who Christ is and that his death truly means everything for us, that we have forgiveness of sins and thus we have life in him. May our hearts burn within us at this wonderful truth. We may not always feel it, but the truth is still there regardless. And isn't it so wonderful that Jesus was patient with these men? He taught them and he stayed with them until they could see, blessing them as he continues to bless us. This is why church is so important to us, because there we have the Word and there we have the Lord's Supper to strengthen and sustain us. For those little ones who can't have the supper yet, I know how precious it is. My own children love to smell the breath of my wife and smell Jesus on her. And I think it's good to encourage and teach them in that way, so that they look forward until the day when they too can come to the table, properly discerning Christ's body and blood in the bread and wine. Well, I hope you find this helpful, and may God bless you as you go about your week.